hands of men are encouraged to report the crimes. But some say justice system fails them. Civil organizations are calling for harsher punishments for those found guilty. To discuss this further, we are joined by legal expert Tamara Mathebula, the Commission for Gender Equality Tamara Mathebula, and Code Red Feminists. And a very good afternoon, and thank you all for joining me this afternoon. Maybe I could start by just throwing the question first to the Commission for Gender Equality and just find out from you what have you been noticing regarding the court's treatment of victims of, violence, rape, and obviously death as well. Have you been getting the kind of response and support that you believe should be happening? Tamara Mathebula.
Good afternoon to you, Tamara, and good afternoon to your viewers out there. And thank you for having me in your show. Yes, basically, I think the Commission for Gender Equality has actually been observing quite a number of areas within the justice system. And I know that we have worked closely with the South African police in terms of looking at the existence of rape kits, both rape kits for adults as well as pediatric rape kits. We have also looked at how cases are handled up to the level of court. And recently, what we have also been monitoring quite closely is how those cases are dealt with in court, which is why not so long ago we have actually issued a statement following the announcement by the Honorable President Cyril Ramaphosa to actually make sure that there are specialized sexual offences courts that should be extended just to make sure that we allow people to actually walk into those courts, women, survivors of gender-based violence, and children. And we know that in those specialized courts, many women that we have spoken to when we do our investigative as well as research work have actually come back to us, Notemba, telling us that the courts are unfriendly. There are long queues. For women who stay in the rural areas, they walk long distances to go to court, and when they arrive at the court, they will actually be turned back to say the case has been postponed. And again, they have to raise another money to take a taxi or a bus and go to a court on that particular date that has been set. And what we have noticed, Notemba, is that even in those courts, both magistrates as well as people that are actually, or officers that are assisting in terms of handling the cases, and also in terms of processing things like, protection orders, are not specialized. They are not trained to actually handle cases related to gender-based violence, domestic violence, and femicide. So we are actually calling out as the Gender Commission, together with the President, to say that we need more specialized courts that can admit and be able to handle cases that are related to gender-based violence and domestic workers. And these must be done by trained, specialized, trained magistrates, specialized, trained officers, and they must be brought nearer to where communities are.
Maybe, Tyrone, you can come in here and just give us an idea. What are the challenges, the frustrations of, the legal system? I understand, the problems that victims experience where police either just don't care enough to do the right thing, but also the courts have been dismissing cases of femicide or striking them off the court roll, for instance. And, and you find yourself wondering, are even our lawyers and the courts really caring for the victims of GBV?
Indeed. Thank you, Nothemba. I think one of the challenges that we have is that the processes that we have that deal with gender-based violence, I mean, in fact, they actually not even termed processes that deal with gender-based violence. You know, we've got the Domestic Violence Act, we've got the harassment and so on. So these are really intended to deal with all sorts of violence and harassment, whether it's men or women and men. I've got no problem with that. The challenge that comes in is that the process itself is adversarial. So meaning that, you know, you've got one party against another party, and invariably it, in most instances, and here we have to separate between, I'll try and expand on it a little bit, between the Domestic Violence Act as an example, as opposed to criminal proceedings where, for example, a woman may lay a case of sexual assault, common assault, and on the list goes, and even rape in certain instances. Because there the standard, when you in the criminal court, the standard is beyond reasonable doubt. So yes, you have to prove your case beyond any reasonable doubt. And it's the state that has to prove the case beyond reasonable doubt, which means that there's got to be an investigation and a detailed investigation. And these things have to be done properly. And the challenge is that with the capacity issues that the South African police face, you do start to get instances where there really isn't much interest in these matters. I mean, you can imagine if one officer has, in a week, more than 100 dockets to deal with, how much time are they going to dedicate to each specific case? And the next week, there are more cases. So what ends up happening is they just deal with these matters almost, you know, just, well, that's what I have to do, that's the work. And so we're just repeatedly doing things without really paying much attention to individual cases. Now, having said that, and quickly, just to deal with the process. So our legislature then acknowledged this problem. You know, what they did is they enacted the Domestic Violence Act, which is actually intended to target exactly this kind of behavior, well, at the very least in a domestic setting. And there are other legislation that do exactly the same problem outside of a domestic setting, very similar provisions. But the problem there is exactly what my friend has just alluded to from the Gender Commission, is that the challenge there is one, that there are so many matters. It's removed from society. People have to travel a long way. These matters get postponed. The process is simply that, you know, you go there, you lodge a complaint against party B. You then provided with an interim order, and that interim order basically allows you to take it still has to be served on the person who perpetrated the domestic violence on you when you're dealing with domestic violence. So let's use domestic violence as an example here. So in a home setting, it has to be served on them, and nothing can be done until it has been served on them. Again, on this principle of all parties are entitled to know the case against them and to represent themselves and defend themselves in court, the Audi rule. Now, until then, nothing can be done, and that's where the challenge comes, because at that point, you've got a date in 2-3 weeks' time in which you have to appear in court. You still have to ensure that this document has actually been served on the other side so that they can appear in court and give their explanation as to what happened. Sometimes are not there, and you actually have to go to the police. You can use the sheriff, but that process is expensive.
It's not only expensive, it just takes so long, and it's very traumatizing on the victims. I'd like to bring in our representative from Code Red Feminist. Good afternoon. Maybe you could start by just telling us what Code Red Feminist actually is, and what do you do for women and victims of GBV?
Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. I would like to start off by just saying a few things about the origins of Code Red Feminist Group. We actually came into being after the July riots in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. Now, those riots may have been instigated, but our concern in Code Red is that the government, the state, saw it as a law and order situation. And we were so distressed to hear that the state